Yo, so today we'll do registration of GST, sorry, registration under GST. And I've already done the study material reading, so I will take on one provision which I don't understand. I'll use Claude to understand it, and we'll move from one topic to another. We'll not try to memorize much now. Our only goal would be to just understand things. So we'll start from the final pages of the chapter, and we'll move backwards. That is towards the first page. So the first topic that I've taken here is cancellation or suspension of registration and revocation of cancellation. So sections 29 and 30 of the CGST Act. So the provisions relating to cancellation, just going to read whatever I don't need to, put in Claude, that I will just understand by reading, and wherever I would need to, a more detailed explanation, I'll ask Claude. The provisions relating to cancellation of registration and its revocation are contained in sections 29 and 30, respectively read with rules 20 to 23. The registration granted under GST can be cancelled for specified reasons. The cancellation can either be initiated by the department on their own motion, or the registered person can apply for cancellation of the registration. Okay. Circumstances when registration is liable to be cancelled, sections 29(1) and 2. Okay. Cancellation of registration, section 29. Cancellation on application by registered person. The proper officer may cancel registration on application by the registered person or his legal heirs in case of death in the following circumstances: business has been discontinued, business has been transferred fully, there is no change in constitution of business, taxable person is no longer liable to be registered, person had taken voluntary registration under section 25(3) but no longer wishes to continue. Okay, so let me use person who is not liable to be registered below the threshold limit may voluntarily get himself registered. Okay, okay. So business has been discontinued, business has been transferred fully, amalgamation, merger, demerger, sale, lease, change in constitution of business. Legal structure or ownership pattern, sole proprietor turns a partnership, partnership, okay. LLP changes shareholding part, okay. So even if a new partner comes in, one can apply for cancellation of GST registration. So this registration is done. Okay. Okay. Fine. So a sole proprietorship gets converted into a partnership firm, a partnership firm gets converted into LLP. These are grounds where someone can apply for a registration. Okay. So section 29(1) talks about cancellation on application by the registered person or their legal heirs in case of death. And the circumstances are business has been discontinued, business has been transferred fully. There is a change in constitution of business. Taxable person is no longer liable to be registered. Turnover below fell below threshold, and person had taken voluntary registration but no longer wishes to continue. Fine. And then we have section 29.2, which says so motu cancellation by proper officer may on his own motion cancel registration if registered person contravenes the provisions of the act or rules. Composition taxpayer has not filed returns for three consecutive periods. Regular taxpayer has not filed returns for a continuous period of 6 months. Person took voluntary registration but has not commenced business within 6 months of registration. Registration was obtained by means of fraud, willful misstatement, or suppression of facts. Person who took voluntary registration but has not commenced business within 6 months. Okay. Registration was obtained by means of fraud, willful misstatement, or suppression. I have a question here. The question is, if let's say I buy something from a registered person, but he fails to file returns, and eventually his registration gets cancelled, do I get ITC? Versus ITC whether cancel does not return respectively deny ITC to the receiver if the transaction was genuine and tax was paid. But the ITC can be denied if the supplier never paid the tax to the government. Transaction itself was fraudulent or fake. Registration was obtained. Retrospective, which may affect. Okay. Okay. So bottom line, just because your invoice doesn't fully protect you, the department can come after you if you supply is one of the most litigated areas of GST. So, in case of fraud, misstatement during obtaining registration by supplier, my ITC can be retrospectively denied. Okay. Okay, fine. So, the circumstances for there's some circumstances given in 21 for you know applying for registration by the registered person on his own motion, and there in section 29.2 there are some cases where office proper officer so motu cancels the registration. So registered person contravenes the provisions of the act or rules. Composition taxpayer has not filed returns for three consecutive tax period, and regular taxpayer has not filed returns for a continuous period of 6 months. Person took voluntary registration but has not commenced business within 6 months of registration. And registration was obtained by fraud, willful misstatement, or suppression of facts. Fine. Circumstances when the proper officer can cancel registration on his own motion, registered person or contravene, person has not filed returns for the period, composition tax on for three beyond 3 months from due date of finish furnishing returns. Registration was obtained by means of voluntary return within 6 months from the date of registration. Okay. So 6 month thing to remember here is 6 month in case of regular taxpayer. If he has not filed return, officer can sue to cancel his registration. And composition taxpayer, if he has not filed return for three consecutive tax periods. Prescribed contraventions which make registered person liable to it. Okay. So now let's look at this. Prescribed contraventions for cancellation. Okay. The first was section 29.1 and section 29.2. And the second point here on is the prescribed contraventions. Doesn't conduct business from declared principal place. Address given at registration is bogus slash non-operational. Issues invoices or bills without actual supply. Classic fake invoice racket. No goods or services, only paper transaction for ITC fraud. Violates anti-profiteering provisions. Didn't pass on GST reduction benefits to customers. Okay. Violates the provisions of Rule 10A. Didn't furnish valid bank account details within prescribed time after registration. Avails ITC in violation of Section 16, took ITC without actually receiving goods or services or without valid notice or beyond time limit, etc. Okay, so avails ITC in violation of Section 16. Okay. Furnishes false information or forged documents at the time of registration, obstructs or prevents the officer from conducting any inspection or proceedings. Fake addresses, fake invoice, fake ITC, fake docs, anti-profiteering, bank default obstruction. Three facts plus three others. Okay. So let's read it from here. Registered person, prescribed contraventions will make registered person liable to cancellation, does not conduct any business from declared place of business, issues invoice or bill without supply of goods or services and provisions in violation of provisions of this act, violates the provisions of section 171 anti-profiteering measure, that is not passing on GST reduction benefit to customers, violates the provisions of Rule 10A, which is not then furnish valid bank account details within prescribed time after registration, avails input tax credit in violation of provisions, okay, furnishes the details of outward supplies, inform GST wire 1 as amended 1A, if any under the for one or more tax period which is in excess of the outward supplies declared by him in his valid return under section 39 for the said tax periods. Okay, violates the provision of rule 86B. Okay, let's ask this. Let to file return under section 39 for each month pardon has not furnished for 3 months. Section for each quarter of pardon. So in case of QRMP scheme, if he has not furnished returns for a continuous period of two tax periods, the registration will be liable to be cancelled. And in case of filing returns under Section 39(1), 6 months, for a continuous period of 6 months, if he has not filed returns. So let's ask these points. Okay, let's ask these points. Exceed supplies declared in 3B, shown more sales in 1. So buyers can claim either less in 3B to pay less tax. Classic ITC fraudulent. Okay. Inflate GSTR 1 and suppress GSTR 3. Fine. Violates 86B. Says certain taxpayers turnover above 50 lakh must pay minimum 1% in cash. Can't use full ITC with cancellation liable. Okay. Violates third for if your registration was cancelled because you didn't file returns before revocation is granted, you must file all pending returns. Violating conditions attached to revocation, fresh cancellation. Okay, so if your registration was cancelled already because you didn't file returns, but before revocation is granted, you must file all pending returns. Violating conditions attached to revocation, fresh cancellation. Okay, fine. So 86B, that is 1% cash liability payment rule, and if one turnover as per one exceeds 3B, okay, fine. These are also grounds for cancellation of registration. Suspension of registration and second proviso. Once a registered person has applied for cancellation of registration or the proper officer seeks to cancel his registration, the proper officer may suspend his registration during the pendency of these proceedings related to cancellation. In this way, a taxpayer is barred from routine compliances, including filing returns under GST law during the pendency of the proceedings relating to the cancellation of registration. The period and manner of suspension of registration is as follows. Okay, so let's put this suspension of registration. Instead of directly cancelling, registration is suspended while cancellation proceedings are ongoing. During suspension, person cannot make taxable supplies. When does suspension happen? On application by taxpayer from the date of application or such other date as may be prescribed. So motu by proper officer, officer initiates cancellation. Registration suspended immediately pending final order. System-based automatic suspension system automatically suspends if significant difference or anomalies found between 1 and 3B, significant differences in 3B and 2B, ITC mismatch. Effects of suspension: cannot make taxable supplies, cannot issue tax invoices, no obligation to file returns during suspension period, ITC of recipients dealing with suspended supplier at risk. Okay. Effects of suspension are: it cannot make any taxable supplies, it cannot issue tax invoices, no obligation to file returns during suspension period, ITC of recipients dealing with suspended supplier is at risk. Revocation of cancellation. If cancellation proceedings conclude, the officer decides not to cancel, suspension is revoked. If taxpayer rectifies the anomalies that triggered auto suspension, suspension is lifted. Cancellation is done. Okay. So is suspension always done during cancellation proceedings? Not always. Generally, yes, when proper officer initiate cancellation. But suspension can also happen independently without cancellation proceedings being initiated. Okay. Automatic system based suspension. Fine. Okay. So let's read it from you. So during the pendency of the proceedings related to cancellation, a proper officer may suspend the registration. During this time, the taxpayer is barred from routine compliances, including filing returns, but he cannot also make taxable supplies or issue tax invoices. The period and manner of suspension of registration is as follows: when registered person has applied for cancellation of registration, where a registered person has applied for cancellation of registration, registration shall be deemed to be suspended from the date of submission of the application, the date from which the cancellation is sought, whichever is later, pending the completion of proceedings for cancellation of registration. So, date of submission of the application or the date from which the cancellation is, whichever is later, and pending the completion of proceedings for cancellation of registration. Okay. Deemed to be suspended from the date of submission of application on the date of from which the cancellation is sought, whichever is sought. Okay, fine. When cancellation of the registration has been initiated by the department in its own motion, where the proper officer has reasons to believe that the registration of a person is liable to be cancelled, he may suspend the registration of such person with effect from a date to be determined by him, pending the completion of the proceedings for cancellation of registration. Okay. Where a comparison of the returns furnished by registered person under section 39 above. The details of output supply, details of inward supply, in the form GST as amended. Okay, let's explain this. When the cancellation of the registration has been initiated by the department in his own motion. So suspension, department initiated rule 21A. Trigger 1, officer's belief. Officer has reason to believe the registration is liable to be cancelled, can suspend from a date he determines pending cancellation proceedings. Automatic system suspension happens when comparison shows significant difference or anomalies. Okay, comparison of 3B with 1A of the person, or inverse supplies derived from suppliers 1 or 1A, GST 2B expected, or any other analysis on council's recommendation or contravention of rule 10A not furnishing bank details, registration shall be suspended. Mandatory, not discretionary. What happens after suspension? Intimation sent to registered email ID. Notice highlights the specific differences and anomalies. Person asked to explain within 30 days why registration should not be cancelled. Okay. Important. No refund under the section 54 shall be granted during suspension period. Department doesn't want you to be claiming refunds while your registration itself is under scanner. Okay, so let's read this. A comparison of the returns furnished by the registration in 39, the details of furnished in Form 1 as amended. The details of invoice are derived on the basis of outward supplies furnished by, or such other analysis as may be carried out show that there is significant difference and anomaly in negating contribution of the provisions. Okay. There is a contravention of the provisions of Rule 10A by the registered person. The registration of such person shall be suspended. Said person shall be intimated in prescribed form by sending a communication to his email address. Okay. In this intimation for suspension and notice for cancellation, said difference and anomalies are highlighted and said person is asked to. Okay. Fine. In cases where the cancellation is initiated by the department on its own and registration of a person has been suspended, such person shall not be granted any refund under section 54 during the period. Okay, fine. So if I initiated cancellation, would I be eligible for refund during the proceedings? Yes, the restriction of no refund during suspension only applies when cancellation is, you know, initiated by the department suo motu. Okay, I'll have my book here. I'll just mark it down. Sure. This is an important point that you should mark it. Output tax. on its. Fine. This is a important point. This one. I think MCQs or in any question it could be tested. A registered person whose registration has been suspended as above shall not make taxable supply. This we have already done. Shall not be required to furnish any return. No 39. Shall not make any tax payment shall mean that he shall not issue a tax invoice or government not charge tax on supplies made by him during the period of suspension. Suspension of registration shall be deemed to be revoked upon completion of the cancellation proceedings by the proper officer. Such revocation shall be effective from the date on which the suspension had come into effect. The suspension of registration may be revoked by the proper officer anytime during the pendency of the proceedings for cancellation if it deems fit. So the cancellation of registration shall be deemed to be revoked. Okay. Suspension of registration deemed to be revoked upon completion of cancellation proceedings. Suspension of registration may be revoked by proper officer anytime during the pendency of proceedings of cancellation. Further, the suspension of registration shall be deemed to be revoked upon foundation of all pending GST returns where GST registration was suspended due to non-filing of GST return for a period for a financial year beyond 3 months from the due date, furnishing said return by composition, or for such continuous taxpayer as may be prescribed by registered person, other than subject to condition the registration has not been cancelled by the proper officer under Rule 22. Not been cancelled under the Rule 22. Suspension shall be deemed to be revoked upon furnishing of pending GST return. Suspended due to non-filing of GST. Where any other order having the effect of revocation of suspension of registration has been passed, the provisions in respect of the supplies maintained. Okay. Procedure for cancellation of registration rules 20 and 22. Right. Let's do this. Procedure for cancellation rules 20 and 22. Voluntary cancellation by taxpayer. Step: application within 30 days of event warranting cancellation. Details required: stock input, semi-finished, finished goods, capital goods, liability thereon, payment made. Ordered by officer within 30 days of application. So to cancellation by department. Show cause notice mandatory, cannot cancel without show cause notice and opportunity of hearing. Reply time 7 days from serving service of show cause notice. Officer drops proceedings, passes order. If reply a special case, SCN was for non-filing of returns. Instead of replying, if person files all pending returns, pays tax, interest, late fee, proceedings drop. Order after within 30 days of reply to show cause notice. Okay. Effective date of cancellation, date determined by proper officer and mentioned in the order. Order will also direct payment of arrears of tax, interest, penalty, section 29(5) liability. Key numbers to remember. Application for cancellation, 50 days of event. Officer order, voluntary, 30 days of application. Supply reply to show cause notice, 7 days. Officer order so moved to 30 days of show cause notice reply. Section 29(5), what is it? Person whose registration is cancelled must pay an amount equal to ITC on stock held, input, semi-finished, finished goods, capital goods on date of cancellation, or output tax payable on such goods, whichever is higher, effectively a reversal of ITC on closing stock. Fine. So, procedure for cancellation of registration, voluntary cancellation by registered officer, registered person seeking cancellation. This I'm reading for from the study material. A registered person seeking cancellation of registration shall electronically submit the application for cancellation. Electronically submit the application for cancellation of registration and prescribed from within 30 days of occurrence of the event warranting cancellation. Fine. He is required to furnish in the application the details of input required in the application, details of inputs held in stock, semi-finished or finished goods, capital goods held in stock on the date from which the cancellation of registration. Okay. On the date from which cancellation of registration is sought. Fine. So if you sought cancellation from 16th of April, so from 16th of April, whatever inputs you have in semi-finished goods, finished goods, held in stock, capital goods, you will submit the details of that along with the application of registration, application of cancellation of registration, and liability thereon, details of the payment. So you will also furnish the liability thereon and all the details of payment, if any made against such liability, and may furnish preliminary documents thereof. Order. Where a person who has submitted an application for cancellation of his registration is no longer liable to be registered, proper officer shall issue the order of cancellation within 30 days from date of submission of application for cancellation. Okay, fine. Suo motu cancellation by department. Where the proper officer cancels the registration suo motu, he shall not cancel the same without giving a show cause notice and without giving a reasonable opportunity of being heard. The reply to such show cause notice has to be submitted within 7 days. Okay, from the date of service of notice. If reply to show cause notice is satisfactory, proper officer shall drop the proceedings and pass an order in prescribed form. However, where the person instead of replying for failure to furnish for a continuous period of, in case of composition, furnish all the pending returns and makes full payment, where the person instead of replying to show cause notice, interest. So the exception to reply SCN is if he files all pending returns. So if GST registration proceedings were initiated because of non-filing of returns and the registered person subsequently receives a show cause notice, then only in that case he can get away without filing a return, without filing a reply of the show cause notice within 7 days, and just by filing all the pending returns, and the proceedings against him will be dropped provided he has paid all the tax dues along with the applicable interest, late fee, etc. Where the registration is liable to be cancelled, proper officer shall issue the order of cancellation. Issue the order within 30 days from the date of reply to show cause notice. Okay. Effective date of cancellation. Cancellation of registration shall be deemed to be effective from the date to be determined by the PO and mentioned in the cancellation order. Taxable person will be directed in the said order to pay arrears of any tax, interest or penalty, including the amount. So, the cancellation of registration shall be effective from the date to be determined by the proper officer and mentioned in the cancellation order. Fine. He shall pay an amount equal to ITC on stock sold or output tax payable on such goods, whichever is high. Amount payable on cancellation of registration. Sections 29.5 and 29.6. Okay, let's put this in pause. So after this topic, we'll only have some other points. Revocation of cancellation. So amount payable on cancellation for inputs, including inputs in semi-finished or finished goods. Option A, ITC on such inputs proportionate based on invoices. Option B, with output tax payable on such goods, whichever is higher. If invoices are not available, ITC is reversed based on prevailing market price on date of the cancellation. For capital goods or plant and machinery, option A, ITC on remaining useful life pro rata or tax on transaction value under section 15, whichever is higher. How to calculate remaining useful life ITC? Total useful life is assumed to be 5 years, 60 months. Remaining life, months left, ignore partial month. ITC to reverse ITC taken into remaining months divided by 60. Illustration from ICI. Capital goods used for 4 years, 6 months, 15 days. Remaining life 5 months, 15 days is ignored. And ITC to reverse is C into 5 divided by 60. Important practical point, the payment is not a prerequisite for applying for cancellation, can be done at the time of filing final return as well. Okay. So here I have a doubt, which is what is output tax? I know what is output tax, but what does output tax payable on such goods mean? Is it on the inputs or on the input? Yes, it means the output tax that would have been payable had those input goods been sold or supplied on the date of cancellation. You hold 100 units of raw materials, market value 1 lakh, GST 18%, output tax 18,000. Now compare this with ITC originally taken. Whichever is higher, you pay that. By this logic, the law treats as if you're deemed to have consumed or used those goods for non-business purposes on cancellation. So you must either reverse the ITC you took or pay the tax, whichever is higher. Basically, you will walk away with the free ITC benefit on goods that were never used in taxable supply. Okay, fine. So let's read it from the study material. So, revocation of cancellation of no, this is this point. Amount payable on cancellation sections 29, 5 and 6. A registered person whose registration is cancelled will have to debit the electronic cash ledger or cash ledger by an amount equivalent to input tax credit in respect of stock of inputs and inputs contained in semi-finished or finished goods stock. Capital goods or plant and machinery on the day immediately preceding the date of cancellation, or the output tax payable on such goods, whichever is higher, calculated in such manner as may be prescribed. However, in case of capital goods or plant and machinery, the taxable person shall pay an amount equal to the input tax credit taken on the said capital goods or plant and machinery, reduced by such percentage points as may be prescribed, or the tax on the transaction value of such capital goods or plant and machinery under section 15, whichever is higher. The manner of determination of amount of credit to be reversed is prescribed under Rule 44. On conjoint reading of sections 29.5 and Rule 44, it can be inferred as follows. Amount of credit to be reversed in respect of inputs, ITC on inputs proportionately on the basis of corresponding invoices on which credit has been availed on such goods, output tax payable, whichever is higher. In case of plant and machinery and capital goods, ITC involved in remaining useful life, reversed on pro rata basis taking useful life, tax on transaction value of such capital under section 15. Okay. So, what is transaction value in case of section 15, and does an uh, output uh, tax on such goods point does not apply to plant or capital goods, right? Correct on both counts for capital goods. ITC on remaining useful life, tax on transaction value. Transaction value means the price at which the capital goods would be sold on the date of cancellation, essentially the current market value sale price. And yes, also for inputs, semi-finished, finished goods. For capital goods, the comparison is specifically remaining life ITC versus tax on transaction value. So, can you give an example of capital goods where both transaction value and remaining useful life are given? Machinery purchased 2 years, 3 months ago. ITC taken on time of purchase 120. Transaction value on cancellation days is 2 lakh. Okay, GST rate is 18%. Total useful life 60 months, fine. Life use 27 months. Remaining life 33 months. ITC reverse 33. Transaction value 2 lakh. So ITC on 2 lakh is 36. So 66 or 36, whichever is higher. So US example, okay, fine. And also, you said to ignore partial month. Does that mean that in case capital good is used for 6 months, 2 days, I will ignore, I will round it up to 7 months when performing the calculation? No, opposite. Ignore partial means round down, not up. So use for 6 months to treated as 6 months. Remaining life is 4 months. The ICA example prefers this. Okay, 4 months is 15 days. Okay. So the 4 months, 4 years, 6 months is okay. Okay. There was a I had a confusion. Okay, fine. Other points about cancellation. Oh, and this point is also very important. Uh, Such capital goods, section 15, is market price on date of cancellation Okay. And also note that another important point here is that debit of electronic or cash ledger by suitable amounts is not a prerequisite for applying for cancellation of registration. It can be also done at the time of submission of final return. Other points about cancellation. A person to whom UIN has been granted cannot apply for cancellation of registration. A person. Okay, so let's look at these other points about cancellation. UIN holders, unique identity granted to UN bodies or embassies. Okay, so UIN holders means UN bodies or embassies. They have no option to cancel. Fine. Cannot apply for cancellation of registration. Fine. Cancellation doesn't wipe out past liability. Tax dues for any period prior to cancellation remain payable, even if dues are determined after cancellation date. Will not affect liability of the registered person to pay tax or dues under the Act for any period prior to date of cancellation. Fine. The proper There's an example 24 proper officer cancelled the registration of Naman Associates on 11th October. Tax dues of Naman Associates for July September quarter are 50,000. Cancellation of registration will shall have no effect on his liability of tax dues of 50,000, even though the tax dues are determined after the cancellation of registration. Cancellation of cross act cancellation under CGST SGST Act, deemed cancellation under CGST Act 2. One cancellation equals to cancellation under both acts simultaneously. Intimation of taxpayer intimated via SMS plus email to authorized signatory, primary authorized signatory by email and SMS. Fine. Final return person whose registration is cancelled must file a final return. Contains details of stock held on day immediately preceding cancellation date. Is continued. Okay. Okay. Fine. Now we have the final topic in this chapter, in terms of the book, which is the revocation of cancellation. This is a small topic. We'll take it up later in the next stream. And so we are done with section 29 and 30 of the CGST Act. Fine. Before we go, should we do amendment of registration? This is a small topic. Yeah, leave it now. Okay. We'll take it up later.